Good evening. I'm Juan Zabala, Vice President at Lamar University, and I'm happy to welcome all of you to a digital broadcast, a digital gathering of alumni and friends of Lamar University. In this time of social distancing, we have at Lamar University decided to keep our connection with our wider community going digitally, a modality that we understand fairly well at Lamar. And so here we are. This evening, we're going to be speaking with distinguished alumnus Bill Macatee, and I will do an introduction of Bill in just a moment. But before we get to that introduction, I want to say welcome, Bill. And just if you have a moment to tell us what it is like to be socially distancing at the Macatee home.
Yeah, well, thank you, Juan. It's great to be with you. I see we're at Chateau Zabala and the beautiful backyard that you've got on this beautiful evening in Southeast Texas. We sort of started having awareness of all this probably 3 weeks ago or so. And normally I travel quite a bit, and my wife travels with me. But we basically have been self-quarantined, obviously for social and physical distancing reasons for the last 3 weeks or so. So it's we have a little putting green set up, which we call the Macatee Golf Club. We live in a high rise in Dallas, so we're on the 21st floor, and it's all kind of walls of glass, so we can, kind of be connected to the city itself and the weather and watch the comings and goings of folks, which has decreased. We're happy to report every day. But I think our story is probably like a lot of folks in that we're trying to follow the advice of healthcare experts and do the best that we can to be good citizens, and pitch in to help in any way we can. As people mentioned sort of at the beginning of this, our grandfathers and relatives of the past were asked to go fight wars and do extraordinary things to be heroic, and we're sort of basically, most of us are being asked to kind of find another thing to binge watch on Netflix. So we can probably do that. It's a big adjustment, I think, for people. We have gone from being obviously these very social beings, which is what we are designed to be, to kind of having to learn what life is like without that. So I think it really makes you appreciate that, but it does force you to slow down. Even though I'm on phone calls throughout the day, it still kind of forces you to slow down. We have some hawks that have a nest not far away, so we enjoy watching them when they come out to hunt in the mornings and in the evenings, and just conversation. I'm talking to family a lot more, and I don't know what it's like for you, but I think it really has been an interesting, just a social experiment to how much our lives have changed in such a short amount of time.
It's impressive, or maybe important to stop and remember that there are people whose lives have changed extraordinarily dramatically as they're on the front lines of dealing with COVID-19 on the ground, dealing with those individuals who have been impacted by it. And a lot of our healthcare professionals are doing extraordinary work on a continuous basis for all of us in this country.
Yeah, we're going to obviously talk about sports tonight in this chat, and there's so much passion around the teams and the players that we follow on a regular basis. But I think before we dive into that, we probably should just take a moment to thank all the doctors and nurses and healthcare workers who are on the front lines, putting themselves at risk to protect us. So please keep those folks in your prayers as we battle the coronavirus. And this, we hope all Cardinals are practicing physical distancing as well. But this is an extraordinary time, and it's one that my wife and I, Sonia and I, were talking about this just yesterday. We're going to remember this period for the rest of our lives. I mean, this is just something that's absolutely unique and extraordinary.
It is. And so speaking of sports, the reason, well, Bill, you're distinguished in many, many areas, but most of us know you because of your sports background. And for those of us who didn't read the entire bio that we sent out, Bill is a prominent national television broadcaster who has anchored the largest events in sports: Olympics, the Masters, the U.S. Open, tennis tournaments, done play by play. That's easy for me to say, play by play for the National Football League. You've also done March Madness, the PGA Tour, the Ryder Cup, Masters, Wimbledon, the French Open, the Super Bowl. You've been a correspondent on NBC's Today Show, and then transitioned recently into a brand new field in the investment world with mid-market private equity. How did a young man from El Paso go from El Paso to Lamar University to this really extraordinary career?
Well, thank you. That was very kind. I always wanted to be involved with sports, but I was not good enough to be an athlete. I was an okay athlete. I played high school football, and I was a pole vaulter, and I was on the wrestling team, and that kind of thing. But I wasn't good enough to do those things in college. And I wanted to stay connected to sports. So being a broadcaster was really the only way to accomplish that. And so I started working at some little radio stations. I went to my first 3 years. I went to school at Texas State. So I worked at little radio stations like in Lockhart and Seguin. And then I got a job doing the new news for a television station in Tyler. That was my first TV job. I was just 19 years old, and then I anchored the 6 o'clock news on Saturdays. And I tell my friends now that my voice hadn't really changed. So it was like, you're welcome to the news. It was an interesting period for me. And obviously, you're new, you don't know anything, you're enthusiastic, and you're doing the best you can. But I think it's fair to say I was out over my skis 24/7, as I frequently am in life. But so that was just a great way for me to get into the business. And then I worked for WFAA in Dallas. Dallas is my home. And then NBC, when I was 26 years old, hired me. I moved to New York, worked for NBC for 6 years. I'd moved out to California, decided to take a little break, and then came back when USA Network was looking for somebody to anchor their golf and tennis coverage. That's when I started doing the Masters. So that was 30 years ago. And then I was able to build a career initially with NBC, and then since the early '90s with CBS. I left USA Network after 18 years of doing golf and tennis and a few other ancillary events for them. And but it gave me I mean, gosh, what a life. And I got to travel around the world. I got to do great events, and I mean, doing 30 Masters, or this year we'll be 30. Hopefully we'll get the Masters in 2020, but this would be my 30th of that. I did 16 years of the NFL and got to do Olympics, and it was an extraordinary gift to me to be able to have this job. And as my friends always remind me whenever I complain about something silly, they remind me there's no whining on the yacht. So that grounds me, brings me back to earth. But I was very lucky early in my career that I was in Beaumont at Channel 12 in Southeast Texas, and I wanted to finish up my degree, and I finished it up at Lamar, and got to know the university, and then sort of lost touch with Lamar for a period of time, and then Rush Schultz, who's the Dean Emeritus of the College of Fine Arts and Communication, reached out to me. This is probably a dozen years ago, and said, "Listen, we'd like to have you reconnect with the Cardinals, and let's make that happen." And he did, and he's a great friend to this day. And I can't tell you how much I appreciate him for doing that and bringing me back into the fold at Lamar. I also want to say, before we get too deep into this, just to acknowledge Dr. Evans and his great team at Lamar, the wonderful faculty, all the administrators, everybody connected with the university. great job that they're doing during this challenging time in all of higher education. They are doing the best possible job for Lamar and its students, and I just want them to know how grateful we are for their efforts.
Well, that's good of you to say that. Thank you. It means a lot. The work that we do at in higher education, as you well know, is transformative for individuals. So an opportunity to make that continue to happen for our students during extraordinary times is a unique moment in history for us, and we're glad to be here. But let's delve then right into sports. It, again, unprecedented what's happening now across the globe. Including the Olympics, as you mentioned, postponed for at least a year. What do you think about when you think about elite athletes whose training and life revolves around peaking at the right moments, not just the right moment in April, but the right moment in an entire year or an entire 2 or 3 years? How does somebody at that level adjust
Well,
to a transition of this
great
magnitude?
question, Juan. I think that's one that they're being asked constantly. There was a video, and I can't remember the name of the player from the Texas Rangers who lives in a high rise here in Dallas, and he put in a batting cage. And he tweeted out, "My apologies to all my neighbors, but I got to stay in shape." And there was video of him just ball after ball in his living room, trying to stay in shape. They're team sports. Obviously, they can't gather, so that's off the table. But individual sports, probably those athletes are at a little bit of an advantage because they typically train alone or with a partner. In tennis, they might have a hitting partner. Um, they're training for endurance and that sort of thing. So it's probably a little easier for them. Golfers, I suspect that most of the players on the PGA Tour have some kind of practice facility that they can go to if they don't have it already in their homes. I think most of them probably do. My little putting green that's pretty wrinkled over there, it's been in the closet for so long. They probably have, that times 1,000 in its sophistication. So I think some of the athletes, their sports are easier to train, but I think that in terms of trying to peak like Olympic athletes, trying to peak for the Olympic Games, that's these are extraordinary times for everyone. I think for us regular folks, I think the idea of sports has been, that's been a huge part of our lives for most of us since birth. So, baseball season, we just missed opening day. That cadence feels very odd. No March Madness. That really seems strange. I am supposed to be heading to Augusta on a week from next Monday, and so that's not happening. We're not doing the Masters. Hopefully, it will be held later in the year, but you never know. And so the cadence for all of us, especially parents with kids who are in sports, it just throws us all out of whack. And I think it's going to be really interesting if things are. I don't think we're going to have a new normal, whatever that looks like, but when things get back to a version of normal and you can start scheduling things, are they going to be able to play the rest of the NBA season? They've already moved the French Open, which normally is at the end of May, beginning of June, French Open tennis. That is going to be late September, beginning of October. So, are they also going to be playing the rest of the baseball season then, the rest of the, or a limited schedule? How about basketball? How about the golf events? So it's going to be really interesting to see how all of this shakes out and if some of the traditional seasons end up getting modified because they have always been in this time frame, but maybe that's not the way it's going to be going forward. So I think that's going to be really interesting to watch. I have been hearing that tomorrow they may announce that Wimbledon is going to be either canceled or postponed. That's a huge thing. I mean, you don't I don't think you fully realize, like for the Masters, um, it is that there are not enough hotel rooms in that area to handle the number of people who come for that week. And so people rent out their houses for that week, and then they go on vacation with their kids and they're out of school and all that. Well, if you're going to postpone the tournament, you have to account for that, where people are going to stay and where the locals are going to go and how all those things fit together. So my point in raising that is that it's incredibly complex, and it goes down multi layers from what we would think just as sports fans. Well, let's just do it. Well,
Yeah.
you can't really do that. And then, having these things canceled, a lot of workers, people who work in these arenas, from security to concessions to all of these folks who staff these events, I mean, they're impacted. They're losing their revenue. So when you see somebody like their income, rather, you see somebody like Mark Cuban who steps up and says, I'm going to make sure to pay everybody going forward. Well, that's extremely meaningful.
Yeah.
And so it's, wow, I keep going back to this, but it really is just such a fascinating time.
Well, and for this program, we were thinking, Bill, that we would sort of keep our questions for the end, but Stefan has asked a question that I think is so appropriate to ask at this moment, but envisioning that whole global scale and the short-term and long-term impact on sports, he's wondering, with these makeup seasons or delayed games or delayed seasons, is this going to be a year with a lot of asterisks in the record book?
I think if they end up shortening some of the seasons, it will. I mean, I given that there are concerns about cold weather, there is a I would think an organic end to the baseball season, right? You don't want to be playing. You can't play when it's snowing or temperature reaches a certain point. So I would think they would have to compress. And this is just my opinion. I haven't heard anything, but I would think they'd have to compress that schedule. I would think when they if they can get back to the NBA in the summer. I don't know what that's going to look like. That's going to be interesting. And again, you have all the logistical things that relate to stadiums and travel and those types of things for the teams. So to answer the question, I think there are going to be some. Yeah, I think there are going to be some.
And speaking of these athletes, it's something that I will confess that I learned this from talking to you, but of course there's a time clock that we're talking about in the calendar year with things that are happening. There's also a time clock that plays for or against elite athletes, and being idled from their game for some amount of time is going to have a fairly dramatic impact on some of the top athletes in our preferred sports areas.
Well, if you take tennis, for instance, the clock is ticking for Roger Federer to win more majors, for Serena to catch Margaret Court, for somebody like Rafa. These are athletes, players who would be the first to admit that they're finishing up their careers. And so every day that they get older and they can't practice or participate and try to win another major or another tournament, that's meaningful. That's meaningful. And as a tennis fan, you talk about an asterisk. Maybe that's where that asterisk comes. That Roger Federer, Rafa, and Serena were denied this period of time in 2020 when they could not win majors. Now, the other part of that is, like, for instance, you go back in history of sports during World War II. For instance, at one point, the great Byron Nelson, won 11 straight tournaments. But that was because a lot of the golfers were serving in the military, and they were doing it in waves where the game was not. Now, listen, to win 11 straight tournaments, that's an extraordinary feat. But there is a little bit of an asterisk there in that the game itself was not at full strength. And so I think that there's some history behind these breaks in sports. This will be globally. This will be one of them. I'm just hoping that we get through this, and that when we are on the other side of this, we can look back and be proud of all of our efforts to flatten the curve, as they're saying, and to just to do the best that we can to help our neighbors and minimize the risk to everyone.
Yeah. Indeed, and it's sort of along that vein of sort of a group of people impacted by these same types of situations. There are the other types of sports that you have also covered in the past, the team sports. And for some reason, I think of LeBron James, first of all, but the team kind of builds around the energy of one player. And I envision that those other players sort of ramp up their game to match the skills of somebody like LeBron. So how do you think that those teams go about maintaining that team atmosphere that makes them all sort of rise to the occasion?
Yeah, that's a great point. They travel together. They're really they're close for a period of time. And I know that basketball is different than the NFL because the NFL they usually come in the day before the game, and so they're not spending a lot of time in hotel rooms. But for hockey and the NBA and soccer, football, those kinds of sports, they are traveling together. They're a family. So that is a very different kind of thing, and I'm sure that chemistry, which builds over time, and so many championship teams rely on, that will be something that they're going to pay attention to. I'm sure the coaches as they come back together. The other piece of that I missed earlier that I should have mentioned because it's obvious to me is on the broadcasting side. You have whole networks that this is all that they do: ESPN, Fox Sports, CBS Sports. This is the livelihood of a lot of folks, many of whom are freelancers, and so I think it's extraordinary when the networks understand that and they do the best they can to help because those mortgages don't go away and all of those things just because you're not earning an income. Those things don't stop. Now we're here getting government help and mitigating and working through those issues. But there are a number of my colleagues on the production side who have they've got things to deal with, and so I'm thinking about them a lot too during this time.
All right. Thank y'all for sticking with us. Our feed went down for just a moment. So I, yeah, what Facebook noticed was that I was busy typing, trying to get to one of these next questions with you. But we were talking about the interruption on those people who make a living around sports and the ancillary parts of it. And one of our viewers, Andy, who is on our faculty at Lamar and works with students who are preparing to go into broadcasting in one of the fields, he wonders if you were in college during this unique time, how would a student practice their work as a broadcaster when no sports are happening? What would you think would could be a possibility for them?
You were limited in really where you could go to learn your craft. Now, literally anybody can learn the craft. They can have podcasts. They can do a number of things. Post videos on YouTube to perfect what they do, and then showcase what they do. We used to have to send videotapes or send audio tapes, that kind of thing. Now you've got all these public platforms where people can see what you do, and you have a chance to practice those things. So I think it's a pretty extraordinary time in learning the craft of media and broadcasting in general. But the podcast is like anybody can do a podcast, and it's it if I were 12, 13, 14 years old and had a dream of being a broadcaster, I would be all over that.
Excellent. Let's talk a little bit more about the, the business of sports. Now, you mentioned Cuban, but there are other individuals who are involved in the sports industry. What do you think the franchise owners or the people who are leading big sports product organizations are learning from this experience? What changes do you imagine we might see in sports and sports planning and sports broadcasting in the future?
Wow, that is a great question. Look, I think what we've learned, there was a push to maybe hold the games with no crowds, and I thought, well, that's an interesting notion. But then the players started to push back on that concept. They said, we get energy from the crowds, and we perform at a higher level because of the crowds. And it's not something that I had thought of, even though I've been around sports my entire adult life. Um, so I think that's one thing we've learned. I think definitively the importance of the on-site fan in the entire sports experience. Um, as far as the other lessons that owners of these teams would learn, there's obviously a big difference between owning an NFL team and your financial resources and somebody who owns a minor league, A team somewhere out in the boonies. So I don't know that there could be a shared lessons learned for them. But I think that at the end of the day, it's important to, I suppose, realize that nothing is forever, and that occasionally life will get in the way, and there will be moments that challenge you and challenge your problem solving ability. And I think that's kind of where we are right now.
Excellent. Well, and Bill, because again, your audience here knows you because of your connection to Lamar, you wouldn't be surprised to hear there are some questions coming in about your experience at Lamar. And so to encapsulate, Terry, who's watching, he wants to know if you can tell us one of your most memorable experiences at Lamar, one of your most memorable memories from Lamar.
Well, I came there in a little bit of a different way because I was already working for Channel 12 in Beaumont, and so I was sort of a working. The term would be working adult, but I'm not sure how much of an adult I was in that phase of my life. But I was technically a working adult, and so my experience would be almost as a commuter. I would come in, be on campus for what I needed to do, and then, like a lot of folks, I would then have to go to work. Now, my work involved sort of being on TV and going to high school football games and driving around town in a it's so embarrassing to say, but Channel 12 at that time, their news cars were purple gremlins with the big Channel 12 logo on the side of it. And I got to tell you, was never prouder to get in a car in my life than to drive around, going to some fast food place to pick up dinner and then run out to the local high school games and shoot film, because we had to film back then. They didn't have videotape yet. Shoot film of the high school games, and then go back and there was a guy named Harry who would process the film at Channel 12, and then I'd edit it and put it together. So that was a different time. Covering Lamar basketball, it was really cool because Lamar made the Sweet 16 while I was there, which was really cool. And then they went and played UNLV, and so we all flew out to Las Vegas, which was kind of fun and a neat experience. And they're, just to put the right time frame here, they made the Sweet 16 a couple years later, but it was still a really fabulous time for Lamar athletics. And still, the athletic department's fantastic, and great things are happening there. It's really been fun to follow it. But I think the greatest experience for me personally, one that I will always remember at Lamar, is being able to give the commencement address. It was the last year where all of the students were in one place. There were two waves. There was a morning ceremony and an afternoon ceremony, and the uh, the commencement address, and looking out and seeing all of those families that were there, so proud and supporting the first ever college graduate from their family, and just looking out at all these kids, and I all have a story to tell. I got to tell you, and just recounting it right now, it chokes me up to think about. It was really an amazing moment. And prior to that, I'd just gotten married a week before that. And so my wife and I had a very brief honeymoon. We went out to Big Sur in California. And I have to say, it's not the most romantic thing in the world to be preoccupied writing a commencement address. But what I realized is that as much as you think that you're going to change people's lives with what you say, and you want to give the best message that you can, my wife, first of all, incredibly patient with me during that process. But what you realize is, as you go back to and listen to others who gave commencement addresses, that the kids all are thinking their own thing. You know, they've got family there, they've got their friends, they just want to get the diploma. It's so exciting for them. And so there is, and I remember Ken Evans was great in guiding me with this, because I thought I had to give some, life-changing speech, and I put a lot of pressure on myself to give this like 20, 30-minute speech. He goes, 10 minutes max. So my wife was very happy that I could finish up my preparation for the commencement address and get back to our honeymoon.
Before I move on to the next question, I need to tell you that today I got an email from an alumna of Lamar, and all she said in her email to me was, "I'm in his selfie," which is when you took the selfie from the stage.
Oh, great.
She was in the audience for that.
Oh, that's great. Yeah, I think they showed that selfie on CBS, because a day later I went and anchored the AT&T Byron Nelson on CBS, and I think we might have put that up on the air on CBS as well.
Yeah, we did, and those of us in Beaumont were proud of the moment. Thank you. Let me go on to another question. Kevin is asking if you had a message for graduates who are students who are about to get a degree from Lamar University in 6 weeks from now. What advice would you have for them?
I think that a lot of it depends on how people are wired. But my general, and I taught at a college in California for a couple of semesters, a sports media class, which was a great way for me to kind of reconnect with students and make me deconstruct what I did. Because at that point, you do things organically. You don't really think about why you do it. You just do it because that's what you've done, and you refine your process, but you don't have to break it down in that way. So that was great experience for me. And what I told those students, and what I tell students now when I have these conversations, is that you have got to go get it. You cannot wait for opportunities to come to you. Vin Scully, the great broadcaster, and I know he took this from somebody else and did not try to own this, but he was the first to tell it to me, is that luck is when preparation meets opportunity. And what I told my students then and students now is that you just have to be ready. You're going to get opportunities, but you just have to make sure that you put yourself in that position, and then when it comes, you're ready to go. But if you sit back and you wait for it to come to you, and gee, I don't want to live there, and that's not the perfect job, and all of those kinds of things, then you may not be, where you want to be 5 or 10 years from now. So I would just encourage everybody to believe in themselves and to be aggressive. Go and get it.
All right. So let's go back to the topic of athletes. At the beginning of the broadcast, Karen had asked, who do you consider to be some of the most inspiring athletes that you've had the opportunity to meet?
Gosh, that's a great question. I've been really lucky. I've been around some extraordinary folks. Arnold Palmer was, I'm obviously dating myself, but Arnold Palmer and Mickey Mantle were my two boyhood heroes. And I got a chance to spend time with them, each individually in different and quiet settings, just to talk. And Mickey Mantle I did several long form interviews with him when he was still here in Dallas. Arnold Palmer, who was also my dad's hero, which was neat. And I tell this story at some speeches that I give every now and then. But I went to Latrobe, which is where Arnold Palmer grew up. His dad was a greenskeeper at the Latrobe Country Club, and then Arnold Palmer worked there too, and ultimately he bought the club. And so I went there and was doing a piece on him for the Today Show, and I spent 2 days with him there, and it was just an unbelievable experience. So we were down in his workshop, and I was telling him what a big fan my dad is of the great Arnold Palmer. And he looked at me and he said, "Let's call him." And I said, "Wow, yeah, absolutely." So handed me the phone, dialed the number. I said, "Dad, you are not going to believe who wants to talk to you." And I handed the phone to Arnold Palmer. And they have this conversation. I can only hear the Arnold side, but he's laughing. They're talking about golf. And I could tell my dad's having a great time. And then so Arnold, after about 15 minutes, hands me the phone back. And I got on, a proud son that I was, and I said, "Dad, could you believe that?" And he goes, "What a great guy. Who was that?" I said, "Dad, that was Arnold Palmer." He goes, "Oh my God, I wish I had known." But that says a lot about what kind of guy Arnold Palmer was. He could have that kind of engaging conversation and be such a regular guy that he didn't need to be Arnold Palmer. He was just kind of one of us, which was such a tribute to him. He was such a great man. And then so that was my youth. And then as a broadcaster, obviously I've gotten to be around people like Roger Federer, who just is an extraordinary aspirational human being. I just can't say enough about him. And he's evolved. He wasn't that way. I'm told in the juniors, he had a temper, and he is disciplined, structured, but kind, generous. He's always thinking about other folks. So I think that I'd put Roger right at the top of that list. But really, I've been lucky enough throughout my career to meet a number of extraordinary folks, and it's interesting because we look at athletes, and because they can hit a ball or they can do extraordinary things physically, we assign attributes to them that are heroic, and sometimes that's not the case, and sometimes our expectations for athletes are tough to live up to. And I did a series for the Today Show multiple times called After the Applause, where I would go interview athletes when they had finished their careers, and they had time to reflect on their lives and put it into perspective. And there were some extraordinary moments and people that I talked to, and that was that one theme that if you think about the athlete, and I don't want to get too serious here, but if you think about the athlete, because the cadence of their life starts when they're young and they're identified as somebody who can do something extraordinary physically, and they have these gifts, they are treated different, and their frame of reference for life is different. And then they go through, high school, they're special, college, they're special, they're pros, they're special. And then in their late 20s or early 30s, that whole thing that has identified them ends. And some of them spend the rest of their lives, 50, 60 years, not being who they are now, but who they were. And that's a really interesting thing to think about. So that was one of the reasons we did that. And that's why, I see these great athletes who are also great people, and I really admire them, and I'm excited for them because they're going to have another chapter of their lives, and it's going to be probably in many ways just as extraordinary as the public chapter that we all got to enjoy.
A couple of questions, but before we finish up, Bill, I've heard you talk to students before about this, the idea of go out and get it, right? Don't wait for an opportunity, go out and find your opportunity. That golden ring is not obviously so easy to see and find and grab as all that. So Bell asks, is there something about your educational background that kept you motivated, that keeps you striving for success?
Yeah, that's another great question. I think it sounds cliche, but you need to have the mindset to ask yourself, how can I get better every day? How can I, in the case of somebody just starting out in their career, where do I want to go? And how do I map my path? Knowing that there are going to be obstacles and there may be false starts. There may be a lot of things that get in your way, but to have the determination to say, no one is going to work harder for this than I am. And I know that there are going to be failures along the way, and I'm prepared for that. This concept of believing in yourself, it's so cliche, but it's absolutely necessary.
Yeah.
Because if you don't believe in yourself, why should anyone else? And so, when students come out, sometimes there's just a hard a work ethic, to work hard, to do the best you can, to not slough off. Most of us are not wired that way. We're human. We're going to make mistakes. We're going to be probably, we procrastinate and we do all the things that we do as people. But I think at the end of the day, you have to be able to say to yourself, what do I want? How bad do I want it? And what's my path to get there?
Great. Excellent. I have to tell you, my friend Tim is participating in this event with us tonight, and Tim wants to know if you can think of the zaniest moment you've had while you're on the air.
I've tried to erase those from my mind, so I don't think there's not one that pops immediately to mind. It's an interesting role that you have when you're on live television because things happen outside of your control, and you just try to be as prepared for those things as you can. And I worked for 20 years calling tennis with John McEnroe. And you talk about an unpredictable factor. John, obviously extraordinary player, and I think one of the best analysts in any sport ever. And he's fun to be with. I mean, he is a lot of fun to be with. But part of his unique character is you don't know where he's going to go. And so I'm sure that there were a few curveballs in there that were that probably resonated, but and other times, but there's not one moment that I can think of where I go, gosh, that was one I'd like to have back.
Yeah. All right. Well, Bill, we want to thank you for taking this much time out of your schedule to talk with us. And we appreciate everybody who has logged on to participate with us as we socially distance and keep our community together. And we appreciate your time and your insight. And honestly, your friendship to your alma mater means more to us than we can ever express. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Juan, and a belated happy birthday to you, too.
Thank you. I appreciate it, man. And so to end the series, Daniel, who has been doing the work in the background here, is going to end the program tonight with a brand new ad that his team has just produced. Thank y'all very much.
I want to help people.
I want to be a part of the solutions of tomorrow.
I want to bring innovations in times of need.
I want to turn my passion for helping others into action.
I want to be the voice that shares truth with the world.
In times of uncertainty, being a nurse is how I will make a difference.
My professors have taught me human resources is about putting people first.
Through the power of mechanical engineering, I've learned how to better the world around me.
Because of Lamar University, I've been given the opportunity to change my world.
To change our world.
Our moment is here.
Our moment is now.
Make the most of it at Lamar University.